that seems to be most prevalent. Adam and Eve would have had all the genetic information, and so as they would have had their offspring, within their offspring they would have had a wide range of skin tones available to them. And this would have seemed probably most prevalent as you see come to Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's three sons, as they begin to repopulate the world, and then again eventually through the Tower of Babel, is these people would have taken their own group of genetic information with them as they moved forward. And so it is believed that Adam and Eve, just because of the range of information they had, that they were likely a middle ground. That is an assumption, that is an idea. But again, we as Caucasians see in Caucasian eyes. An African American is likely going to see through their eyes. Ultimately, Adam and Eve would have probably not, I don't know, they probably would not look like much of any of us. I think they would be very different that way. And these young ladies here kind of give you an idea of the genetic range of information from skin color. All descendants of Adam and Eve, all in need of the same Savior that we do. These are twin sisters. Their parents, I don't remember which is which, but they had a black father and mother and a white father and mother. And the twins came out. One was skin color of each. Here's another set of young ladies. And it's interesting, you know, you think about it, you're introducing genetic information. And so where if either parent would have married a same or similar skin color, the offspring would have been in that same vein. But because you've got a genetic information here, it makes this kind of thing possible. And so when we think about evolution, and I want to some degree what I've done tonight is kind of merge two presentations to kind of get a couple of ideas into us. With the idea of evolution, some Christians, I still think, see that God could use evolution. And so I propose the question to you, and I'd like for some feedback, brief answers, but I'd love some feedback from you. How would you respond to this question? Did God use evolution to bring about humanity? And I want more than just, no, he didn't.
No.
All right, that's good.
Well, no, because I think we've covered this. That evolution is based on death. Death is from sin, so there's no way it could have happened. And there's no way that it could have been brought underneath evolution, because that would imply death for sin.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point.
I think we've covered that.
Yeah, good point. This is kind of review here.
The whole idea that man gets better without God gives it a taint of not possibly being true. We know that everything without God descends in its natural growth, its natural advancement isn't to better itself, but worsens itself.
So you're saying that ultimate evolution says that things get better, what we see actually in life, and what the Bible teaches is just the opposite.
Right.
So, okay.
Absolutely.
Good point. Anybody else?
The thing about the species never actually change into a total different species, like all the different ones are just variations, so why would a human being?
And what do we base that idea on? Do you remember?
Now I'm on the spot, so.
Well,
No, it's fine. Now, yeah, can y'all help her out? Remember Genesis 1?
The light kinds.
Yes, exactly.
What's that?
According to its kind.
According to the times.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that limits the variety within a kind. So you're exactly right. Any other thoughts? Because some of y'all may encounter this very question. Because it's not just a once in a million question. It is actually a fairly, could God have used... See, we're not asking the question, could God have used evolution? God can do anything he wants. I'm not trying to limit God from doing anything. I'm only trying to explain what I understand God has done. God becomes the limiter of what he can do.
looking at the concept of evolution in the fossil record, and there's no record of any pre-man. Every now and again, somebody says they found a skull that's a zillion years old or whatever.
Mhm.
Compared to dinosaur bones and seashells and the rocks, and there's no, I have never heard of any human beings or whatever comes before modern man, humanoids.
The transitional.
Yeah, and that pertains to a lot of species. Where's all the in-between critters?
That's a good point. Let me, if I could take what you're saying there, just kind of flesh this out. Because today we say we have chimps, and I'll just say apes, and we have humans. Now there are those who, in seeing that God used evolution, says that all three of these actually trace back to what? Now some of you may say, and I've actually talked to my mom and corrected her on this, very nicely and loving, because I'm just want to stay there. But it's like humans came from apes, so why do we still have apes? That's not what evolutionists teach or believe. Evolutionists teach that we come from an ape-like origin here, and that all are descended from this ape-like. Now the question becomes is, what is this? Which brings us to our missing link. And this is what they're looking for. And so this is what you're talking about within the fossil record. They keep looking for this. And they're still looking for that. And they're going to keep looking for that. Because anything they find either is this or this. It's either a monkey or it's human. It's never a transitional. Does that make sense? So this may help you a little bit just to understand even what the argument is. So when you see the term missing link, that's what they're talking about. Do y'all have anybody else have another thought on this question here?
I think the
Yes, sir.
biggest thing about evolution is it's always been about simple to complex. And what the scientists are now discovering, it's always been complex.
Yeah.
It hasn't been simple.
Right.
It is an intelligent designer. We know that as God. So.
And to that point, this here actually would go back in what's called a Darwin's tree of life to like a single-celled organism, a bacteria, and ultimately through millions of years, and I'm oversimplifying this right here, this becomes that. And so ultimately we're kin to bananas and everything. I mean, that's how that's processed. All right? So when we look at man, who we are, and considering the process, I always like, the kids like this in particular. I like to see, if anybody thinks that any of these are relatives to them. We have different favorites, but you get an idea here that this is ultimately part of the arguments, is that we are somehow kin to these type of animals, these monkeys. When actually what we see is that, as the Bible teaches, is God created man in His image. And God is certainly not a monkey. He created Adam as a fully formed human, just as we are humanity as well.
The one on the right, though, bottom right, does look like Rob Lowe.
It does look like, in some of his new commercials, yes it does. Yes it does. It does. I did not catch that, but I guess it's the nose, isn't it? And so when we look at this understanding, these missing links, this connection back to how do we connect with this ape-like ancestor, we've had several ideas come along. And I wanted to walk with you through this Java man, Piltdown, Nebraska, and Ramapithecus. Homo erectus, or called Java man, as you can see, was found in 1891. Found an ape-like skull cap, a few teeth, and a human thigh bone. It was claimed to be the 500-year-old missing link. It's right here. And so this was one of the things that was touted as proof of the day. What we see is that this gentleman, Rudolf Virchow, regarded as the father of modern pathology, said, in my opinion, this creature was an animal, a giant gibbon. In fact, the thigh bone has not the slightest connection with the skull, and this was dismissed. Now we come to Piltdown Man. And I want you to note here the limited amount of information that's even being found in the first place to even build their arguments upon. Segment of a lower ape-like jaw and a segment of a human skull. And of course, if you're thinking already, if you're predisposed to look for the missing link, that ape-human in between, it's not going to bother you that you have an ape-like skull and a human-like jaw because you're anticipating that connection. And so, as you can see, it was claimed to be a 500,000-year-old missing link, or intermediate is termed here, and featured in textbooks, New York Times, the conservative, I'm sure, newspaper said this is proof. And what actually came to light here was that 41 years later, tests were ran, and the jaw was from an orangutan and the skull cap was human. They were unrelated and not connected, and this was dismissed. Nebraska man. Fossil evidence was found in 1922. This was some of the evidence used at the Scopes monkey trial to prove human evolution. It was supposed to be a 100 million year old intermediate, and the truth was that it was an extinct pig's tooth. Note how much information they were working with. A tooth. That seems illogical to even claim unless you're so passionate to find this stuff that you're going to build your argument on very little information.
Desperate.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Ramapithecus. 1930s, what they found was this lower jaw, and what they drew was this. Some good artists. Now, we laugh because you see the illogical, but you go to any natural history museum right now, and you'll see it. And in fact, if you go to the Creation Museum, they took Lucy. Lucy is from Ethiopia. It's supposed to be one of the oldest transitional intermediates, missing links here. The Creation Museum did something very interesting. They took the general skull shape and then fleshed it out differently. They made it look like a monkey, and then they made it look like a human. Point being is how you and what you do with the information. We're left to grow up in a world thinking humans have evolved because of what we've seen in our textbooks. And people who are drawing these things in these textbooks are people who are lost in all likelihood, or at least extremely confused. The claim, 14 million year old intermediate, the truth. 1970, a baboon was discovered in Ethiopia. And Ramapithecus was dropped from the human line. And so we see that Java man, Piltdown man, Nebraska man, Ramapithecus, all have been used through the 1900s as proof of a missing link, and have all been dismissed. But what about like the Neanderthals? Where would you plug them in? How should we see them? Well, a few basic ideas, and in the early days of kind of uncovering some of this information, the original drawings had something like this. Again, we've already been talking about this idea of what you can do with your artwork to communicate a message that you're already predisposed to believe. Well, what we see ultimately as time unfolded is that Neanderthal had a thick brow, long skull, sloping forehead, protruding skull in the rear, stocky body build, and short extremities. The Neanderthals were also, as they had been able to uncover some of their time in caves and how they lived and did played out their lives, that you'll see these key things here. These are very human things they're doing. We do these things. And in particular, burying their dead. Apes, monkeys don't bury their dead. And so, as this quote here is talked about, most anthropologists recognize burial as a very human and very religious act. Another interesting point I've come across here in looking at Neanderthal is Dr. Jack Couzeau, is an orthodontist, and he went over to Europe and was able to get a look at some of the supposed evolutionary information on human fossils and human evolution. And he noticed a thing, I believe it was at, what does it say here, souvenir counter, yeah, in the museum, there was this drawing. Now, you and I might look at this drawing all day long and not think a thing about it. But being an orthodontist, something caught his attention. The lower jaw was out of place. Instead of the lower jaw setting into the proper hinge spot, they didn't alter the size of the jaw, they just moved it forward because they're predisposed to seeing that ape-like lower mandible, lower jaw. And when it actually was corrected, they changed the entire look of the skull. Interesting. I see bias here by the evolutionists because they're so desperate to find this missing link. Another thing here, as we talked a minute ago, is the thick brow ridge. You think, well, that's kind of ape-like. But another thing was proposed, and we see this with those of you who have had braces, as an example, or maybe having braces for your children, that our bones can actually be moved. That's what braces do, is move our bones and our teeth. And so it's believed that Neanderthal actually, because of his diet and his chewing, actually created stronger muscles in his forehead, and actually, because of that action over years, thickened his brow. Nothing ape-like about it, just simply a function of how he lived life. And so conclusion about Neanderthals is that he had a protruding brow ridge, stocky body build, and short extremities, isolated population of people, lived in cold, harsh climate. After the flood, talking about the coming ice age, 100% human and descendant of Adam and Eve in need of a savior just like you and me. Post-flood, isolated people group that went extinct, and we have their remains and evidences of them living in caves today. Any questions? Thoughts? Yes,
If I
ma'am.
keep chewing gum, am I going to have a brow?
Yes, I would worry I would stop chewing gum right now. I don't know that gum is quite as heavy duty as what he was having to deal with. Just check. It's a good question.
The biggest thing on it is Lyle's came out in the papers stating that we're out to disprove Moses' theories. And so that was something that was said from the very beginning and it hasn't stopped.
And that's, that's a good point, because that's what we should recognize in all this, is it's just not simply a battle over scientific information, but again, it's a battle really ultimately over the cross and the gospel, the implications of who we are as humanity in light of a sovereign God. Human evolution and its implications. Just real quickly here, evolution is a process by which species arise and change over time. Evolution is the idea that all organisms have descended from a common ancestor. They have used the term who to you. And so there's this belief that there has been this millions of years of evolutionary process, and that's what beats at the heart of many of our education systems today. But as we look at evolution, what its implications are, what gives human life value, what makes us significant as people, ultimately is because we're a creator. Now, one of the things I like to point out in this